from the Penn libraries.
Hi guys. So this is actually built on a Windows PC, and we're going to try it on the Mac, so hopefully everything's in the right place. Feel free to interrupt me anytime. Going over a lot of trends and stats and pretty graphs that I've put together to kind of show what this landscape looks like for mobile technology. So again, feel free to interrupt me at any moment. We're going to go over device adoption data both at Penn and around the world, and the US as well. I'm going to go into OS updates, both for Android and iOS. I'll talk to you about some of my predictions based on trends that I've seen in the past, what you should look forward to, and a couple of recommendations, and we can always get into that in the hour-long play and share session at the end. And we have a lot of devices to play with today. I should say we actually don't have the Amazon devices. I forgot them at the office. But I do have a total of 24 devices that you can check out, and I can always run and grab them if you do really want to see them. So first we're going to go into devices at Penn. This is something that we always talk about. The trend is just up. This is the number of connections that we have per Penn key at Penn. So if you have 2 devices, you're going to be one of the people that contributes to our 1.9, I believe, devices per person right now. We still don't know where this is going to stop. It's just been continuously growing, and you can actually see when the students go home over the summer where there's a dip. We do get a smaller dip in the winter. You'll see that one right at the line. But there's bets that it's going to end somewhere around 3, could go even higher. Maybe it's going to start leveling off now. We'll see soon. Devices connecting to Penn. This is all devices. So this is not just mobile devices. We have a lot of iOS. 41% of all the devices we have connecting to our PennNet are iOS devices. That's iPhones and iPads. Android is right around 16%. Windows is at 17%, and OS X is at 24%. And that makes up the large majority of all the devices we have. And that is a total of 66,500 devices connecting to Penn Wireless. And this is data from November of this year. If we kind of drill down and look at the mobile devices specifically, well, we can see that iOS is the overwhelming majority. We do have a couple of BlackBerry users that just don't want to let go. Windows is just growing ever so slightly. We get a device or 2 every month. And then the other identifiable could be anything else that is spoofing itself, or maybe something that we're not accounting for. We'll see. So we're going to get into adoption in the US. I love this graph. Somebody actually took the data of devices that were being activated in the US, and they overlaid it with a logistic function graph. And the idea behind it is that you're going to get waves of people that start getting new technologies. And the innovators are always first. They're the ones that kind of latch onto a technology because they love the idea of having something new. And those actually, according to this, were the RIM users, BlackBerry, when it was still really hot. They had around 2 million users back in January 2005. And then we saw that the iPhone launched in July of 2007, and that's when the early adopters really started picking up mobile technology. Then Android started launching, and that was in 2008. Then we saw the Droid launch, the Galaxy S launch, and you just see it just shot up exponentially. And we just started seeing the early majority surpass at around 50%. When we hit the 50% mark, I believe that was in April this year. And we saw the fastest growth, and now we're starting to see that it's beginning to level off. And so by this estimate, we're going to reach around 100% in October 2020. So we're going to start seeing laggards pick up in October 15. But you might be asking, what does 100% mean? So then they took it a little bit further, and so the U.S. population, I believe it's about 315 million, maybe 330 million right now. And in particular, they're targeting the U.S. population over 13, because that's really the majority of the users that we're seeing. There's a couple of kids playing with iPads and such, but that's the target audience. Any questions about this? So the latest OS updates, we have iOS 7, which completely revamped the way that iOS looks. They totally stripped out all the skeuomorphisms. They added a lot of really interesting features. I'm going to get a little bit more detail into that later. That was released in September. And then there's also Android. The newest version is called KitKat, which was released in October. And again, they just improved the way that Android works. And for a while, we thought this was going to be called Keyline Pie, and last minute they pulled that out and just decided to call it Kit Kat. And the reason for that naming convention is they named them by desserts. So they went from, remember C was cupcake, and there was donut, Eclair, froyo, gingerbread, and now we're on to K, Kit Kat. But they had a lot of promotions going around the idea that if you buy Kit Kats, you can get free Play credit, or you can win a Nexus. But I'll get into the features later. Now, in terms of adoption, it's kind of pathetic on the Android side, sadly. Kit Kat has already been out for about 2 months, and only, I believe it was 5%. I'm sorry, 1% is Kit Kat. Jelly Bean is at 55%, and they only hit that around 2 months ago. So it took them quite a while to get there. It was released in December of 2012. So adoption of Android is really slow, but the real reason behind it is there's so many layers to getting the OS updates down to the user, because it has to go from Google to the manufacturer to the carrier, and then finally pushed out over the air to those devices. Luckily, Google did release something that's called Google Experience, so you can actually buy devices directly from them. So those are the Nexus line of products, and also the hottest Android devices like the S4, the HTC One, the Xperia Z. You can actually buy them directly from Google with a stripped-down version of Android, so you'll get those updates much faster. But we don't know what the adoption stats of those are. They're most likely developers. They're not going to be Joe average user on a wireless carrier. iOS, on the other hand, within 2 months, they have already hit 75% of all iOS devices, which is very impressive. And this is iOS devices that are capable of running iOS 7. I believe that's 4S's and beyond, though we wouldn't really advise putting it on a 4S, but you can definitely put it on a 5. So let's talk a little bit about Apple iOS 7. They completely redesigned the UI, as I mentioned. They created a layered structure, which makes it a much flatter experience. You have the background, which will actually move as you tilt the phone. They have these really interesting UI features. There's also a new notification pane where if you slide it from the top, you get 3 separate tabs. You get your all notifications, missed notifications, and today's notifications. A lot of people said they ripped that directly off Android, but as we know, Android and iOS just constantly leapfrog each other when it comes to the technology. There's multitasking. So if you double tap the home button, rather than getting just a bunch of icons down at the bottom of the screen, you're actually going to see full thumbnail views of what the app looks like. So that's a much richer experience if you want to switch between apps, and you can actually just flick them away, close them. So they definitely improved that quite a bit. And they also introduced a couple of enterprise features that if whoever is running an MDM really can take huge advantage of them, like Open in Management, which lets you determine which apps can open particular files sent to your email or any sort of sharing services that you're using. And then there's Activation Lock, which is one of the best features by far in terms of security. Android has not gotten this far yet, but the idea behind it is if you lose your phone and somebody tries to wipe it, they won't be able to unlock the device. It'll actually prompt them for your Apple ID in order to just be able to get into the device to start the configuration. So that's a huge deterrent to theft. As I said, Android has not gotten there yet, but we'll get into that in a second. Google has gone about taking back Android, and I call it taking back Android because they have started stripping out the components that make Android what it is, and they've been putting them onto the Play Store. Now what that means is there's a lot less need to have to do major software updates and go through that whole manufacturer, carrier, and then over-the-air update to the consumer. They can finally just put it on the Google Play Store, and consumers can just update that app on their device. So a couple of examples are the Google Keyboard, which used to be just built right into the OS, is now on the Play Store. Google Hangouts, which used to be Google Talk, which was installed on the devices, is now on the Play Store. Google Calendar, Google Search, Gmail, Google Voice, and Google Drive are some of the biggest ones, and there's a lot more. And they're constantly pulling stuff out and putting it on the Play Store. I just heard a rumor, I can't remember which app it was, I think it was Phone, is now going to be on the Play Store as well. So that's pretty impressive that Android's pulling out Phone from the device and now making it an app. So that could potentially mean that there's going to be phone replacement apps that you could use to really enhance that feature set. I did mention the Google Play devices. Now I'm going to talk about Android Device Manager. So what you can do is you can turn on Device Manager, and this is for all devices that have Jelly Bean or later. If you open up the Google Settings app on your Android device, you can check off a box that says Allow Remote Factory Reset, and you can activate it. And what that lets you do is, if you Google Android Device Manager, it'll take you to a page that lets you track all of your devices. You can actually turn on the GPS and locate them, or you can make them ring. It's a feature that has been available on iPhones for quite a while. It's called Find My iPhone. Android now has it. Now, if they could only implement activation lock, that would be really cool, because then we don't have to worry about theft on Android as well. So now we're going to get into the pretty graphs that I was talking about, trends and predictions. So the reason why I put this chart together is because I realized that there's a lot of devices out there. Now, Apple is definitely not one of them, where they sort of release one device every year, and they were by far the largest increase in terms of devices by doubling their devices to 2. Nobody else has doubled their device count. I digress. Samsung, on the other hand, has taken the exact opposite approach, where they just release devices like water. They just create tons and tons of devices to really suit everyone's needs. Now, as of 2011, you can see they started dropping off, and they dropped down to 28 devices, which is still a lot. It's still the most devices that we've seen across all the different manufacturers, and these are just Android. Now, keep in mind, they also have Windows Phone, and they also have non-Android, non-Windows Phone, like non-smartphones. So that's a huge number. In terms of Windows Phone devices, they really didn't take off with it like they did with Android. They maxed out at 4 devices and then dropped it back down to 1. But it looks like they're going to continue to release just 1 Windows Phone per year. LG, similar trend, not as extreme. They're at 18 devices. Not much to say about that, but they are innovative. And I would say that Samsung and LG are constantly in a race to come up with new technology to really differentiate their products, and I'll get into that a bit later as well. For LG Windows phones, they dropped down to 1 in 2011. They haven't released one since, but I heard a rumor yesterday that they're going to be releasing the new Windows Phone next year. We'll see if that pans out or not. HTC, similar again, but they've sort of dropped off. And the reason why they released the HTC One was that they realized that they had too many devices, and they don't even have that many compared to Samsung. But the idea was that this is the one device that you need, so they call it the HTC One. And they are potentially going to be lowering that number even further based on the marketing campaigns they've been running. They too have Windows phones, but they also have dropped down to 1, and it looks like they might also continue to release 1 device per year. Motorola, again, very similar trend. They're down to 8, and they too have taken a very similar approach to HTC, where they're really trying to cut down the number of devices that they have. Sony was really late to the game, but somehow they still followed that trend. The first year that they were out, they released 22 unique devices. And I should say a comment about this is that this is unique devices. So if they released, like Samsung released the Samsung Galaxy S4 and then the S4 LTE, because it was specifically for, or it wasn't the S4, like the S3 model. They released a specific one for Verizon back when they had LTE. I'm not double counting those devices. So this is a filtered set, so there's no bloating of the numbers. Without the filter, I think the peak for Samsung was 65. So a lot more devices. And then there's Nokia. They are the only ones that are really taking off with Windows Phone, and they're just ramping up, and they've gotten up to 10. So we're starting to see a cluster. We're seeing 3 clusters here of 1, which is the Windows phones and Apple, 10, which is Android and Windows phones, and that seems like a magic number for most of the manufacturers, and then 18 and 20, which hopefully we'll see come down. Based on the trend, it looks like we'll continue to see that. So another thing that really interested me was what is going on with screens, because that's really what drives a lot of people's decisions for buying a device, and it also is the most expensive component of any smartphone. So in 2011, we saw 720p come out for smartphone technology, and in 2012, we saw 1080p. So I'm going to show you how that actually affected the PPI, which is pixels per inch on devices. Now keep in mind, if you have a 1080p device that's 3 inches, you're going to have a ridiculously high PPI, but you don't necessarily need that because it's such a small screen. But then again, you might have something like 6 inches that's 480p, and you're going to notice that it doesn't look very good. So you're going to see a couple of fluctuations here. I'm going to talk you through them. Apple is the only one that doesn't really match the rest of the carriers, or the rest of the manufacturers. Reason being, they had the earlier versions, the iPhone 2, 3, 3GS, that had a, it was not a Retina display, I can't remember what they called it, but it was very low PPI. It was hovering right around 160 PPI, and it was a 3.5-inch screen. Then in 2010, they released the iPhone 4, which introduced the Retina display. And that actually doubled their PPI up to 320, I believe, somewhere in that range. And the reason why they decided to do that is because after a bit of research, they noticed that at around a foot length, your eye cannot differentiate more than 300 pixels per inch. So that's why they're hovering at right around 300 PPI. When they released the iPhone 5, they extended the screen, but they kept the same PPI by extending that vertical resolution by just a bit. So you can see it kind of levels off. So you can ignore that smoothing of the graph. It really should just be kind of a sharp line between the two. Samsung's Galaxy S4, which is the latest device, was their first 1080p S series device. When they first came out with the Galaxy S1, I believe it was a 480 device with a 4-inch screen. And then as they increased the size of the device, it started to go down. Then when they increased the resolution, it shot back up. And now they're at, I believe, just under 450 PPI. Similar thing happened with their Galaxy Note series. They started out at 720p. Then they increased the size of the screen, which dropped the PPI, and then they shot it back up by putting in 1080p on their Note 3, and they also increased the size of the screen. So they are really up there in terms of PPI. But the reason why the Note 3 is lower than the Galaxy S4 is because it has a larger screen. So you have the same resolution, but the PPI is lower. HTC, it was much more difficult for me to identify devices that were their cutting-edge devices. They had the Droid line, they had the G line, they had the Desire line. And so what I did was I picked the devices that I thought were representative of their cutting-edge devices. I did not include the Verizon devices because they were specific to Verizon. So I kind of stuck with the devices that were available across the US and around the world. And so you can see they have a very similar trend to the Galaxy S series. It may not dip as much, but that's simply because I'm not comparing a single product line, rather the whole manufacturer line of products. Motorola is a standout case because they consistently stay under Apple's PPI, and they have not released a 1080p phone, interestingly enough. Their latest phone, which is the Droid Ultra, comes out at just under 300 PPI. And they also, it's a 720p screen, I believe it's around 4.5 inches. And it seems that they're going to continue this trend. There have been no rumors that they're going to be releasing a 1080p phone anytime soon. And I would argue that the reason why they do that is to cut costs, because a 1080p device is much more expensive. Sony, again, strange characteristics. They came in late, they came in hard, and they really stuck up in terms of PPI density. And now LG, you can see that they had a very similar trend, and that little drop is a little bit misleading. I'll get to that in a bit. Their latest device that had a 1080p screen is a LG G2, which we have here today. Their latest device was the LG G Flex, which is a 720p flexible phone. It's one of the first devices to feature that technology, which we think is going to be very big. And that's why I kind of dropped it off at the end. But if we were to talk just about their highest resolution devices, then they would be right up there with HTC, Sony, and Samsung. And now the Nexus series is a Google series of products. So this is a mix of various manufacturers. They started with the Nexus 1 back in 2009. You can kind of see it just bounces around right between all the different manufacturers because they went from HTC to Samsung to LG, and the past two devices have been with LG. So you can see that the LG graph, I mean, if you ignore the G Flex, it's very similar to the Nexus line growth. And finally, Nokia. Their latest device is the 1520. It's a 6-inch 1080p screen, so you can see it's much lower than even the Galaxy Note, Galaxy S4, and all the other flagship devices, but that's simply because it's a massive phablet. It's not really just like a smartphone, it's a phablet. And so we don't know what's going to happen with them, but I imagine they're going to be releasing slightly smaller devices with 1080p screens, so we're going to see them jump back up into that little mix-up there. So the next thing that's going to happen is Quad HD. Quad HD is 4 times the resolution of 720p, and we've also heard of 4K displays. Samsung has already claimed that they're going to have a 4K display for their Galaxy Note series by 2015. So all of this, when I put in that Note 4 when I was making this graph, all this kind of clumped down because a 1080p or a 4K display on a 5-inch size ends up being around 600 ppi. So we're looking at doubling that, which Apple has claimed is sufficient. We have no idea if people are actually going to buy into that. It's probably only going to be a select few that really care about pixels. But everybody else is most likely going to hover somewhere in this region. That's what my guess is at this point. I could be completely wrong. Maybe we find out that quad or 4K on smartphones really is a big deal. So what to look forward to? Like I said, higher density displays. LG has already released their first quad HD display. It comes at 538 ppi.
Does it come with the same price tag?
So this is a prototype model, so I don't think they have any pricing information just yet, but I imagine it's going to be a little bit more expensive. Last time I put together sort of state of the displays presentation, it was they had the thinnest display in the world, which was a 1080p 3mm thick display, or something. Ridiculously thin. But I imagine there's a huge cost associated with getting it that thin, that big, or that high resolution.
I assume it would have to be at least $1,000.
For the device, maybe, but
yeah,
for the screen,
device,
so
yeah.
for the screen costs, I think that they hover at around $150 to $200 just for the display. With screens such as these, they might be shooting for a particular price point, but it might be another $100. In which case, you might be right. It might end up costing $1,000 for a phone that has this kind of display.
On a similar note, what is their argument for a phone that has a 500 to 600 ppi?
The argument is,
who are they targeting with this?
I think that the argument is that people have been buying these 1080p phones, so why wouldn't they buy a higher resolution display? I mean, with the Galaxy Note 3, you're talking about a 1080p display, and now it has 4K video capability.
Well, me personally, I have arguments for once we got to 1080 with a phone to the size of the phone we're carrying now. But with a phone that has a PPI of 600, well, we're talking about a 4K display in a phone that's, what, 4 or 5 inches?
Yep. But we might be seeing larger displays and potential foldable displays. So if we can have a foldable 4K display that goes in your pocket, you fold it out, it looks like a tablet, that might be a better argument, because then you're talking about going from about 5 inches to maybe 10 inches, in which case you're going to be right around that 400, 300 ppi range.
Yeah.
So stretchable or foldable,
So
whatever comes out first.
So we're kind of looking towards the future. This is a
Yes.
pre-development for the
This
next
is
phase.
probably a 5 to 7 year out plan.
Okay.
But at least getting 4K on such a display is not just the display itself, it's also the chipset, it's also all the data that has to go into the device. They have to figure out how to get this to work. It's a technology advancement. Personally, I don't think I would use a 4K phone. I'm not that big on pixels. I mean, I like pixels, but I'm not that crazy.
And also, in order to use it like a other phone, you would have to assume that the network would have to get upgraded too, right? Because if you're trying...
Not necessarily, because you're talking about a display. So the display is entirely encapsulated within the phone. It's not that you're... If you're going to be streaming Netflix 4K video, that's another story. But,
Yeah.
but there
Because
is...
how else would you take advantage of the screen unless you
So
stream something.
if you have a Galaxy Note 3, you can record 4K video, which means you'd be able to record your 4K video and then watch it in 4K right on your device. But right now they only have a 1080p screen. So when you're recording in 4K, you're only watching it in 1080p. That's horrible. You're losing all those pixels.
Okay.
And the camera is independent, so
Yeah.
you could have a lower resolution camera with a high resolution screen.
And then it won't look right.
Right.
So all the technology is kind of moving forward. And to answer your question about the network, LTE Advanced is going to be the next big thing. Samsung has already created a LTE Advanced Galaxy S4 for testing in Korea for whenever they roll out their LTE Advanced network. And it really is just like a race. Everybody wants to get to that new technology first, which is great for consumers because then we get to see all these really cool devices that we probably will never care about. But at least some of the technology will carry over into whatever ends up being in our pockets. So next, curved and flexible displays. There's two devices that already have curved displays. There's the Samsung Galaxy Round, which is up top. That was the first curved display. They beat LG to it by just under a month. They announced October 9th, and then LG announced October 28th. The big difference between these two is that the LG G Flex actually flexes. You can bend it. It's really cool technology. But Samsung, on the other hand, just has a round display that you can kind of tilt, and it'll recognize it's being tilted, and it shows notifications on the screen. So we have to wait until the software catches up to the hardware to see what the advantages of this type of technology is. But there are flexible displays coming from both. Samsung can wobble their displays already, but the phones have not gotten there because this involves battery technology, it involves silicon technology, the glass. Everything has to be flexible altogether, and that's why LG's G Flex is really impressive because they figured out a way to make everything flex just enough to where it doesn't cause damage to the phone. Maybe after repeated use, but.
Why do you want to have a flex display?
So one idea is if you sit on your phone, it's not going to break. But that actually kind of brings me to my next section, which is device hardening. This is actually a picture of the LG G Flex, which has a curve, but you can flatten it on the table. So if you sit on it by accident, you're not going to break your phone. But on top of that, they're also introducing self-healing technology. So what that means is the back of the phone, if you scratch it, after time, it'll actually kind of disappear. Really interesting technology. They had a video on YouTube of a copper brush just scratching the back of the phone right next to a Galaxy S4. What looked like a Galaxy S4. And after about 2 minutes, all the scratches on the G Flex just completely disappeared. You can kind of see them, but for the most part, they got minimal. They minimized the scratches on the back of the phone. So that combined with all the flexible stuff means that if you drop your phone, it's less likely to crack. So it's a lot of potential security when you're going to be buying a device. And the phone that's working in the cup right there, that's the Sony Xperia Z. They introduced waterproof technology, so the phone can actually sit, I think it's for half an hour or longer, just in submerged water, and it'll continue to function. So all those combined means that we're going to have very interesting devices that are going to be much more resilient in the future. But in addition to that, we're also getting faster. 64-bit technology was introduced on the iPhone 5S. Qualcomm very quickly introduced the Snapdragon, I believe it's the Snapdragon 805 with 64-bit technology. And Samsung followed suit as well with their Exynos processor. So they're all coming out with 64-bit. With that means we're going to be seeing more RAM. Galaxy Note 3 has 3 gigabytes of RAM on it. There's rumors that the Galaxy S4 will have 4 gigabytes of RAM on it and a 64-bit processor, but that's just going to continue to grow. Question?
Does that mean it's also going to be hotter?
I'm not too sure. Probably not. What that means is if we have 64-bit processors, then they should be more efficient, which means that they should actually run cooler. Though if you're going to be running it for a very long time, then yeah, it will get just as hot as the 32-bit processor. So the next big thing is wearable technology. We actually have one here today. Find it. I will find it. We have the, in my jacket. We have the Samsung Galaxy Gear, which is the smartwatch that Samsung released. But it sort of turned out to be a Me Too product. They didn't really do anything different with it, and it kind of missed the mark in terms of what it can do. Actually, I'm going to go to the next slide. That's it right there, right in the middle. We also have Google Glass, which has been a really big thing, which we have today, right, this afternoon. But it's still at around $1,500 for the device. So it's definitely not a consumer device. It's entirely geared towards developers and early adopters. There's rumors that Apple's going to release an iWatch. Lots and lots of rumors, trademarks that have been submitted and such, but no confirmation from Apple just yet. HTC 2 has been rumored to be releasing a smartwatch. Qualcomm recently announced theirs, and then the Pebble, which has been around for quite a while. We're waiting for the Pebble 2. Hopefully that'll be a nice addition to the wearable technology lineup. But the Pebble has been rated fairly highly in terms of wearable technology. Google Glass actually has beaten out the majority of the other ones in terms of functionality that it has available on it. So I just wrote this comment, and while you guys read this, I'll go to Galaxy Gear. So be careful not to shock yourself. This is the Galaxy Gear. The neat thing about it is it has a speaker down the bottom. It has a camera on the side, so you can take really awkward photos with it. But it also has microphones, so you can actually record voice notes, and I found that to be one of the better features. It has an Evernote app, so you can actually record your voice notes directly into Evernote. I'm a pretty big Evernote user, so that's been pretty useful. It's kind of Dick Tracy style. When you're on a call, there's a speaker, you can hold it right up to your ear and have a conversation. It works pretty well in low noise environments. As soon as you're in a noisy area, it just doesn't work well at all. But I will pass that around, and that's actually paired with the Galaxy Note 3, so if anybody wants to check out its features, you're welcome to.
So does it have a phone in it?
It does not have a phone in it. It works over Bluetooth technology. So if you get a call, your phone will actually vibrate and ring, but you can answer it right on the phone. There's a dialer built into it, so you can turn it on and swipe up, and there's a dialer right there. So you can initiate the call from your smartwatch directly on your phone. That's what makes the phone call. And then swipe down, put that away, swipe down again to open up the camera. There we go.
Do you want me to start there?
Oh yeah, you can. If anybody wants to see anything, just let me know. I'll show the slide with everything on it in a bit. So modular devices. This has an interesting story behind it. About 2 months ago, there was a company called Phone Blocks that released a video of, wouldn't it be nice if we could replace components on our phone without having to replace the whole phone? And so they kind of shot out this campaign saying, in a month, we're going to be making a big announcement, so you should tweet about this and like us and stuff. And what ended up happening was a month later, Motorola announced something that's called Project R. And we have no idea if that was a campaign that Phone Blocks was just promoting Motorola, maybe it was some sort of viral campaign. But Motorola announced that they're going to be releasing modular devices, and it looks like it's going to be coming in 2014, maybe 2015. And the idea behind it is that you really just buy all these separate components that you slide into your modular device. So if you want to upgrade the camera, you should buy a camera module, and you can upgrade just that one component of it. So this is really just doing exactly what computers went through. When you could build your own computer, you can now build your own device. Motorola started out by releasing the Moto X, which gives you full customization options. You can actually build your design. And what that means is you can pick your color, both on the front and on the back of the device. You can pick the accent colors, and there's, I believe there's 300 different variants that you could create and have the device shipped to you within 4 days. So very interesting idea, and it looks like they're taking it even further with this hardware. The other big thing that we're going to be seeing and have seen is carrier changes. So T-Mobile released their Un-Carrier plan, which is eliminating subsidies The idea behind it is that you don't have to pay $80 a month or $100 a month to own a smartphone. They made it $50 for unlimited talk, text, and high-speed web up to 500 meg or maybe 2 gig. After that, it's 3G for free, unlimited. So the idea behind it is great because it really lowers the monthly cost. And the CEO has very wonderful language when he announced this. He said, "Stop the BS," but not so nicely. And he was talking about other changes that they're making to their plans, which include unlimited LTE for any tablets that you bring to their network. There's plans for international use. They're trying to lower the cost. So there's a lot of really good reasons why T-Mobile is a good choice when it comes to cellular. But AT&T has followed suit, or so it seems. They're introducing their value share plans, which means that you'll be able to, again, lower your cost and potentially eliminate subsidies. Now, what that means is that you're going to be paying full price for your phone. But in the long run, that means that you have more power over when you upgrade, what phone you get, and you're not really locked into any contracts. So now we're going to get into the selecting device, and this is really optional. If you guys want to just go directly into the hands-on, you're welcome to. Just a brief overview. We've sort of achieved the sweet spot for the hardware. There's very little innovation in terms of form factor, with the exception of Galaxy G Flex, the rounded displays. But once those flexible displays start coming out, we're going to start seeing a lot more interesting use cases and a lot more interesting designs. Software is really the differentiator right now. I'm a huge fan of the Nexus experience devices, the Google experience. But you'll see that LG and Samsung have really overlaid Android with a lot of features. In terms of the S4, they have the technology that watches your eyes. So if you look away, it'll pause a video. There's a lot of sharing capability built into the devices, and they're really trying to mimic some of the features that Apple has built into their iOS devices. But I won't get into that. There's just a lot that's going out there in terms of software. And then what it comes down to, you need to select which sort of bells and whistles you care about the most. Do you really want a nice camera? Maybe you do want a 40 megapixel camera on your phone. Maybe you want to get something that has really nice speakers like the HTC One. Or maybe you really care about having physical buttons rather than capacitive touch buttons. Those are the sorts of things that might help you guide your decision in getting your next device. And what it comes down to, there's really 4 separate categories of devices that you're going to be looking at. There's the smartphones, which are up to 5 inches. Galaxy S4 is 4.99 inches, so it's the largest smartphone you can get. After that, you're going into the phablet range, which is the Galaxy Note 3s, the LG Optimus G Pros, and any other devices that are between 5 and 7 inches. Then you're looking at small tablets, which are 7 inches to 9 inches. So it looks like we're going to be seeing a 7-inch phone sometime soon in the US. It's already out there in Korea. And then there's tablets, which are 9 inches and larger. So with that, questions? Sure.
BlackBerry is officially dead.
It's not. I brought a Q10. They're still hanging in there. They refused to sell the company.
They're dying.
What's that?
They're dying.
They're dying, yes. Their subscriber base is quickly falling, but there's still a lot of corporations that admire the enterprise capabilities that they offer, though Samsung is really starting to catch up with their Knox software, and any sort of MDM solution will, mobile device management solution will really put BlackBerry in a lot of money.
That's one of the things. iPhone 6. That's supposedly when it might be coming out. Sort of what's the latest and greatest?
There's been a lot of rumors regarding the iPhones. For quite a while, there have been rumors that they're going to be releasing a larger device. I think that would be great. But as you can see, they went with the iPhone Color because they wanted to get a device that was lower cost. So that's sort of a counter argument to the idea that they would be releasing a larger, more premium device. In terms of resolution, they really have bought into the Retina displays. They have Retina displays on their laptops, on their iPads, on their phones. It's kind of hard to tell if they're going to be releasing a higher resolution display. But since they released 64-bit, we kind of imagine that the devices are definitely going to get faster. And the 5S, which has the fingerprint sensor, it's really neat. It gets you into your device very quickly. There's a lot of security concerns surrounding that because really your fingerprints are your identity. They are not a password. So a lot of people debate whether or not you should be using the fingerprint technology. But they are innovative, which is good. Anything else?
Tell for a minute about the phone blocks idea. I don't think anybody can really argue the potential that has, but what should we temper our excitement? Is there a legit possibility this will come out?
It's something that a lot of people have been excited about for a long time. There's a lot involved in making that work because you're talking about creating a device and components that should be able to interact with one another. But the Motorola CEO actually had a hangout where he talked about Project R, and he said that the idea behind it is that they're trying to go directly to the manufacturer of the components and give them the opportunity to get into this and get behind it. And if they succeed in doing that, then there's a huge potential of phone blocks or Project R really kicking off. Yeah.
So I have a question. Just it's on this topic, but not what you talked about. Android is so fragmented. There are so many people that have different type of phones, and if they're stuck on a particular build of Android, what should they do? Because some companies are not very quick when it comes to updates. So you have people looking for ROMs and violating agreements with their phone. Do you think that people should just what is your official advice? Do you think people should just stay with that phone? Should they just switch to another brand that has a newer build? Should they violate their agreement, find a ROM, and upgrade the ROM on their phone? What do you think is the best avenue to deal with this such fracturing of Android like this across campus?
Each case is going to be unique. Now, the reason why I pulled this up is because what we're seeing is these manufacturers are doing a much better job of releasing the newer updates, simply because they have less devices to release updates for. Samsung and LG really are only releasing updates for their top-of-the-line products. So the advice that I can give to somebody if they're looking for a new phone is don't go for the lower-end models. Ultimately, when you're paying for a device, the majority of the cost is hidden in your subsidy. So if you're on AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, you're paying for that phone over time. You're not really paying for it up front. So when you're paying $200 for an iPhone 5S versus $100 for an iPhone 5C, you're talking about, in actuality, $600 versus $700 instead of $100 versus $200. So it doesn't look like as big of a difference. If you are on an older device that doesn't have Jelly Bean, at least Jelly Bean, then definitely should consider upgrading your device. If you are at least on Jelly Bean, then I would say you're in pretty good shape. Because you're going to be getting those Jelly Bean incremental updates. And since Jelly Bean is really starting to grow, it's getting up to 50%. It's not at the tail end, which means Google really cares about it right now. So if there are going to be any sort of security concerns, it will be taken care of. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Anyone else? So I will go to hands-on, and here's the list of the devices we have. Again, without the Amazon cables.
One more question.
Sure.
Do you see in the future a way for us to leverage the power of our smartphones as we're going forward? Because it was like, for example, there was in the Bluetooth phone where they theoretically thought about taking it and you could actually stick it in like a kiosk that would simulate desktop computing, but it was just the phone that you would, you know what I'm talking about, like you use your phone as your desktop.
Yeah.
Do you see things like that catching on in the future, or that was probably just more of a fad?
So about that phone, they actually didn't hit the mark.
No. I know. I'm just that's why I'm asking.
But the idea
because we have so
behind
much power now, and now we're going to 64-bit computing. We're going to quad-core processor on the phone. So it's kind of like crazy to think that sometimes that I have a laptop, I have a Core 2 laptop where there's some phones that have faster processors than my laptop, but I'm not leveraging the power of my phone. I'm just doing stupid stuff with it. And the laptop now, I'm trying to get all the juice out the laptop, and it doesn't have as much power as the device that's in my pocket. So I'm thinking, is there a way in the future that they're going to be able to let us leverage all this power that we're putting into the phone?
So about Ubuntu, before we let go of it,
Yeah.
they did pair with an OEM. They didn't say who, so they will still be releasing that device. And the potential behind that is great. The problem with these sorts of devices end up being desktop devices is that they run an ARM architecture. So they're not going to be able to run the typical software that we're used to using. So until those software developers end up creating software that's competitive with Windows or Mac software, these aren't going to go anywhere near what you're describing. But once it gets close where you get a very similar experience, there's a lot of potential for that.
Is there a chance that one of those two companies go into this kind of idea where my phone can be more than just a phone?
Microsoft is doing that. So the idea behind, we actually have the Dell Venue 8, which runs on Atom, on an Atom processor, which is sold with Computer Connection. And this device can be used as a desktop replacement, though I don't believe it has a dock. Is that right?
Not on the 8.
Yeah.
There's a 11 that will have a dock, and we're hoping to get it soon.
Yeah, so that sort of scenario does work with Windows 8 Pro devices. RT, I just heard a rumor this morning that they're going to be releasing it for free to get more adoption from the different manufacturers. With Pro, there's a much better use case because I guess you could plug this into a screen, maybe with a USB hub or something like that.
With the Pro, I've seen and I've heard of them doing that with Pro. I just haven't had the chance to do it myself. Having one, where I find it funny that Windows and Apple are going in two opposite directions on the same topic, whereas Apple, their desktops are coming into the iOS field, and Windows tablets are going more in the direction of becoming a PC. I was wondering more along the lines of where we're going to see phones doing the same type of thing.
That's going to take a much longer time. Yeah. So Android, Google's approach to this is they released Chromium, which is supposed to be the desktop sort of OS that you would use. Android has some overlap with that. A long time ago, there was a rumor that they would sort of merge the two and make it one. It hasn't happened yet, but that's not to say that it won't happen. With Google stripping everything out of Android, there's a potential that they can strip it down to the point where it's very similar to Chromium, though Chromium is entirely Chrome-based and Android just runs Chrome. So yes, there are a lot of apps that you could run that are very similar to what you would on a laptop or a desktop, though I don't think that's the way that Android was intended to be used. But there are desktops that have, there's actually a Asus Transformer AIO, which is an 18-inch display. If you disconnect the display from the computing base, it runs Android. So there's that sort of merge, which we might be seeing more of, rather than seeing Android turning into a desktop architecture.
I'll stop the stream so people can walk around and try
Sure.
the devices.